Getting ready to do the next job on the C4 Corvette. This is a 1992 and been enjoying it for 2 years, except for driving around on the rough roads in this town. The town I'm in has roads that are made out of concrete. You can see them down there, and although they may look smooth, they undulate and have massive expansion cracks in them, and driving a Corvette around there, not a lot of fun sometimes. So what I'm going to be working on today is replacing the existing shocks, and here you can see one. This car has the adjustable ride suspension. I think it's an FX3 option, and you can see the actuator here and the Bilstein shock down there. You can see how it's mounted there and up top. Quick test, some good news. I disconnected the actuators on the old Bilsteins and started the car. You can see it's running, and there's nothing on the display here, so my guess is maybe somebody has already removed the annunciator bulb there. So we also checked whether or not the adjustment control here has any effect on the turning of the actuator, and when that was adjusted while the car was in the on position, it was not in run, but it was in on. There was no activity at the actuator, so perhaps that is disconnected, or part of the system is disconnected somewhere else. Now, obviously the right thing to do for a Corvette is to replace it with all original equipment. Unfortunately, this selectable ride control is very expensive to replace, and there's lots of parts to it. This is the original sticker for the car. Got this from the Corvette Museum. Neat thing you can do with Corvettes. And the selectable ride control was $2,000. Another thing you can order from the Corvette Museum if you want is a build sheet for your vehicle. And this is the build sheet for this car, and you can see the option here. It's the FX3 selectable ride control. This car apparently also has FE7, which I assume this stands for heavy duty front and rear suspension. So if I'm not going to replace the original Bilsteins with selectable ride control and get all of that working, the question is what shocks to get. And so I go to the wisdom of the web and Corvette forum. Many of you, I'm sure, have gone there. It's a good place to look. You can see things like different ride discussions, different shocks, KYB, gas adjust shocks. Those are actually the ones I ended up getting. One of the reasons that I went with the KYBs, well, number one, they're fairly inexpensive, but that's not the primary reason. I was really looking for a more comfortable ride. And I went to the forum, and it says things like, KYB probably makes more shocks than anyone else in the world. Decent for low-cost shocks. And here's another one that says, I have them on my 95. In my opinion, they ride slightly softer than the Bilsteins. Not suggesting that anybody in particular get the KYBs, but this is what I went with. I got them from Amazon. You can buy them from many different places. So here is the rear shock ad on Amazon. You can see the shock and the grommets there, and the washers and the nuts. There's also a slightly different one for the fronts, so you got to get the right shocks. And this one claims that it works for the 92 Chevrolet Corvette. A couple more opinions here. This one reads, I needed to upgrade the shocks on my Corvette. These KYBs gave a comfortable ride without all the rough ride of high-performance shocks. The car is more comfortable on trips and rough roads. I definitely recommend these for Corvette, providing the car isn't going to spend time on a racetrack. So that's important. You need to decide what your goals are. Now, the primary purpose of this video is to kind of do a before and after of how good the ride is. With the old Bilsteins, as far as I know, these are original. This is a 1992, so they're 26 years old. They are probably worn out, and the evidence on the web suggests that that means a harsh ride. I don't know that that's necessarily the case for worn out shock, but that's the belief. And so what we're going to do in this video is drive around the area and use a program on a tablet here. I forget the name of this one, but it's basically an accelerometer program. The graph is here. Okay, it's got X, Y, Z. It's DC coupled. It's reading out in G force units, and I can scale it back so that the scale includes 1G, so that's the blue line here. So we're basically at 1G. And if I move this, bounce with the seat, you can see it goes from almost 0G to a higher G force. Now I may take this and try it in a number of positions on the car. I may try it here. I may also put it on the floorboard down here and see if it reads the same. The seat has some of its own bounce to it, so the floorboard might be better. Okay, we're in the car. Car's running, and I'm getting ready to take off, and we'll see how this goes, see if I can hold the camera while we're driving. The accelerometer's here, but I think I've decided to put it on the floorboard. First thing I'll do is hit clear data. I'll put it on the floorboard, drive around a little bit, and then hit stop button, and then save it to a file. So that's the plan there. Floorboard is down there, so let me hit clear data. There'll probably be a big spike when I toss it onto the floor. We'll see how that goes. Alright, so it's started again. I don't know if you can see that with the sunlight there. And I'm going to put it on the floor. I think I've got it scaled reasonably. Max 2.5G, minus 1.3. Here we are, sitting on the floor. Big spike from bouncing onto the floor. Alright, time to get going. Okay, it's very sunny to the left, so I think we're going to go to the right, and I may have to set the camera down at some point. But here's where we're going. Sorry about that, that was me. The camera's sitting on the steering wheel now. I'm trying to hold it in place, and you can certainly see the bumpiness. I'm looking at the graph. The graph is showing, well, I don't know, I gotta watch where I'm driving here. Graph is showing several tenths of a G. Wait till you get to this bump. This is a great bump here. Watch this. Oh yeah, that was a good one. And here's the graph. So I'm slowly taking things apart so that hopefully the job will be easier when I have to loosen all the bolts and then retorque them to the right settings. The connector was down here. You can, yeah, there it is. And the other piece of it is here. This cable led to the actuator, which is right there. And I had already pulled that off. I'll pull it off again there. But what I've done now is I've taken this trim piece off because there's kind of a wall here that if I remove it, it's easier to get to the stuff I need to get to down there. There's a few bolts here, 10mm bolts, and there were some smaller diameter ones that held the coolant lines in place. I had to take those off to get this out, but also to release the actuator cord because it was jammed back in there. These are yellow. That's classic for the Bilsteins. And so what I've done is I've painted the new front shocks, which will be visible. I painted those yellow. Had it strung up from a tree outside to paint it with the engine enamel spray paint. This is one of the rears, and I didn't bother to paint it because it will be hidden by the wheel. And I'm not trying to fool anybody. These are not Bilsteins, and it will be immediately obvious to anyone who knows it about the car. So just going to leave those unpainted. What I've done after taking off the trim plate, this is on the driver's side now, taking the trim plate off there as well as on the passenger side, and I have removed the selective ride control mechanism from the top of the shock. It came off of here, and it is here. Was actually able to get the shock out without taking the wheel off. You can see the two holes for the bolts that were being a problem down there. They're 13mm, and I was able to get another socket wrench with 13mm on the bottom, and there was enough clearance between the wheel and the bottom of the arm there that I could grab hold of it and hold it and then turn the top one, or vice versa. So that all worked, and as you can see, I have the shock out. Here is the hole at the top where the new bushings will go in. The old bushings came out. Let's go over here and look at the shocks. So before putting them in, I'm comparing them for size and whatnot. So the Bilstein is on the left, the original shock. The faux Bilstein, the yellow painted KYB shock, is on the right. And you can see the pieces that I had to take off of the top of the Bilstein, and I'm trying to match up the heights. The new one is a little bit shorter, just a tiny bit. I think it'll be okay though. The bushing configuration is a little different, so it's not as bad as it looks here. The top surface of the old one was just a little bit beyond the top surface there. This one, if this bushing doesn't smash too much, will be about where that is. So it should be okay. I'm not going to worry about it. The throw on these, you can see how much the throw is, so it's a small percentage of that. Success. The shock is in, and the lock nut here is tightened up, and the lower two bolts are tightened up, and we're done. Front shocks are done, and it's time to start on the rears. This time I'm going to actually measure the height of the car before I put the new shocks on, because some people remark about how much nicer their car sits after they've put in the new shocks. Here we've got a ruler, and we're at 26 3/4 inches right here, and so that's how high it's sitting right now. And we'll do the job and then look at it and see how much it goes up. And let's take a look inside here, see what we have to work with. These adjustable Bilsteins, the adjustment mechanism is up there, so I have to take out those two bolts. According to the OzStar video, one of my favorite YouTube tutorials on Corvettes, these are 13 millimeter bolts there, so we'll get that ready. And down here, I'm told by OzStar that not this forward bolt here, that just holds it to the wheel hub, but in the back there, there is one other bolt, and it's 18 millimeter. Obviously this shock is shot. I mean, look how dirty it is. It's a mess. So it'll be interesting to see how good it works after all of this. Here's how the wheel arm is supported on these race ramps with a wooden spreader. And of course you got to do something like that before you take the shock off, because otherwise the whole arm will fall and probably damage something in the assembly there. So did all that, and it popped right off, and now we'll go to work on putting the new one in. What I wanted to show is that this shock, obviously it's very dirty, but it's also not got hardly any pressure left and very little viscosity. So what I'm going to do is hold it here and press down on it, and you can kind of judge from what I'm doing force-wise. So here we go. So I'm really not exerting hardly any force at all. I mean, I could do this one-handed probably. So it's a little, the teeth here are biting into my hand, but anyway, you get the idea. It's not got hardly anything left. Now, this is the new one, KYB shock, and if I press down on it, it's very hard. In fact, the first time I couldn't even do it, but it's loosened up a little. So I'm putting most of my weight on it and then releasing. And you can see the dampening, it comes up slower, but mainly it's got about 5 times the force needed to push it down. So this should actually produce quite a change in the car. It may even change the car height. That went in easy. The new shock has the bushings on it, like on the fronts, and I dutifully tightened up the lock nut against the other one in a nice firm fashion so it won't come undone. My little fishing wire is there so that the next owner can get to the connector, which is covered with electrical tape. The nice thing is I was able to put this in without any effort at all. The lower bolt goes on down here. I have not put it on yet. This upper one, I might lower the car a little bit to get that in better position so I don't stretch the shock. But aside from that, I think it's going to be pretty easy. Time to button it up. Have all 3 bolts torqued, top ones and the one at the base. And time to put the wheel back on and we'll see how high the car sits, see if it's changed the car height. Shock is in, the wheel is on and torqued, and checking the height. The height is now almost 27.5 inches, approximately 3/4 of an inch higher than it sat before, all due to the higher pressure in the new shock. The old one was very easy to compress, and so the weight of the car would make it go down further. This one is not as easy to compress. In fact, it was very hard to compress. So the car is going down less far, and it's sitting about 3/4 of an inch higher than it was before. So that's kind of a plus. Time to test the ride with the new shocks in. All 4 shocks are in, and I think we can go out now. Okay, gonna go up to the same speed as before. This is a 40-mile-an-hour stretch. Okay, here we are. 4 new shocks. It's a bright sunny day. I honestly think it feels better. Here comes the big bump. Yeah, I believe that's more controlled than before. I really think it is. That was another big patch, and then it gets smooth up here. Well, after that one. So as we saw in that video clip, the shocks are definitely not miracle workers. The road is still rough and the car still rides somewhat rough. However, I've driven the car around a few days now, and except for those segments of roads which are some of the worst around, the car is actually quite nice. I was on some roads that I had traveled on before, and I really think it's a much more settled ride. Now, let's quantify that. What you see behind the video here is the results of putting the acceleration data into an Excel spreadsheet for before the shocks were replaced and after the shocks were replaced. This is before up here, this is after. The horizontal axis is time, so it's from 28 seconds to 278. So that's about 4 minutes. And the vertical axis here is g-force from 0 Gs up to 2 Gs. What does it mean? Well, as the car bounces up and down, you're going to, when you hit a bump, you're going to get a high g-force above 1 G. 1 G is just background gravity, and this goes up to almost 2 Gs here. And then when it rebounds after that, the original shocks are going all the way down to 0 Gs. And so that's definitely a thing. If you look at the after case, there are no cases of 0 Gs. Now also, if you look at sort of this region here and this region here, the total height is somewhat different here. Now it's not night and day, but it's not bad. It's definitely an improvement. This segment, says Street 3, is the segment that the other videos were on. And so the big bumps that we hit are here and here and here, and you can see them down here as well. To really see what's going on, however, we need to zoom in on one or more of these regions. So I zoomed in on this region right here, which is actually over here on this one if you match things up. And so let's take a look at what's really going on in detail. All right, so here it is. Leading up to the bump, this is the old shock on the top here. Leading up to the bump, the road is quite quiet. You get a little bit of bounce here, but then you really hit the pavement, sharp bumps in the pavement. And you can see what's happening. It shoots up, and then it goes back down, and it oscillates back and forth. And that's a fast version of what you see in most videos, or if you've ever pushed down on a car and watched it kind of bounce up and down for a car that has bad shocks. This car has high spring rate, so I think that's probably why it's so fast. This is probably what some people would call wheel hop frequency. It looks to be about 15 to 20 hertz when you look at the numbers. And here's a significant case where it hit a bump, and then it just rings like crazy. Now also, after this, there are some sections where it's just ringing a lot, and here's a case where it's going down to 0.2 Gs. Now let's look at the bottom. This is after replacing the shocks. So you can see, for example, this case where it was ringing up and down a lot on the old shocks is quite controlled here. Also, this spike, this bump right here, is very controlled. And so this quiets the ride. It's less rattled in a sense. And finally, the really nice thing, I think, is that in this section where it was bouncing up and down while the car's still oscillating up and down, it kind of reinforces itself and the car just goes wild. Whereas down here with the new shocks, it's much more controlled. And so it's probably about half the amplitude of the acceleration forces that we feel when we are bouncing around in the car. And so I think it's definitely an improvement. It depends on the road, but so far I am quite happy with this. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope if you decide to replace shocks in your car, you achieve the goals you want.